Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 must-read DC graphic novels. Now this is not a top 10 best DC graphic novels or my favorite. These are 10 that I think if you're a fan of DC Comics, then you should read these before you die. That's what this list is. The only caveat for this list is I have made must-read graphic novels videos in the past. If they appeared on those lists, then it's not on this video. So that list includes these right here. So if you're watching this video and you're like, why isn't that book in there? That's a must-read. That's why it appeared in a past video. And my only other caveat is I held myself to one Batman book and one Superman book apiece because it'd be very easy to fill this video with Batman, Superman books. Those are two of the most prominent characters at DC. They generally tend to get some of the better writers and artists on those books, so they tend to have more of the well-known and must-read titles. But I decided to limit myself to one apiece for each of them as to not fill this list up with just Superman and Batman and have more variety. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Actually, there's one more thing, which is that to me, a graphic novel is just a collected edition. That's it. It could be a trade paperback, or it could be a hardcover, anything. It doesn't matter if it's an ongoing, if it's a miniseries, if it was just a straight to trade paperback, whatever. That's my definition of a graphic novel for this video. So anyways, let's get into it now. Going in no particular order, the first comic in this list is Nightwing The New Order, which is a 6-issue miniseries from Kyle Higgins and Trevor McCarthy. As you can see, I don't have it in graphic novel format. I only have all 6 issues from the miniseries. I didn't get the trade paperback. I got them as each issue came out. But anyways, it is a graphic novel. You can pick it up in graphic novel format, and it is amazing. It's not talked about enough. This, to me, is one of those books that's an instant classic. As soon as it wrapped up, it's like, yeah, this is going to be known as one of the best Nightwing stories ever told, and in my opinion, it is. I feel like it's not talked about enough. It should be brought up more, so that's why I'm bringing it up here. This is a Nightwing book that takes place in 2040. Nightwing leads this governmental group that is in charge of making sure there's no metahuman activity at all. But then a lot of things happen. Nightwing has a child, and that child shows some metahuman activity, shows that it's a metahuman. So then Nightwing suddenly can't be this grouchy leader of this anti-metahuman group anymore. He's got to figure things out. There's a lot of things that happen that I don't want to spoil, but that being said, it's great. It's really good. Again, it takes place in 2040, a futuristic Nightwing book, so there's a lot of relationships and dynamics that are different than you know them in the current day with Nightwing. It's really cool, action-packed, love it. Kyle Higgins is a guy that loves Nightwing. It's always great when you have a talented writer that loves the character. He's a guy that loved him so much that when I went to Emerald City Comic-Con a few years back, when he was writing Winter Soldier, I was listening to his panel, and he was talking about how much he enjoyed writing Winter Soldier, and he talked about how his Winter Soldier book is essentially a Nightwing book, and he's like, yeah, so if you want a good Nightwing book, read my Winter Soldier comic. And this was at a time when he had been essentially booted off Nightwing and went to Marvel, and then wrote a Nightwing book at Marvel because he likes Nightwing so much. So that was cool. And then this was his goodbye to Nightwing, essentially. This was the last time he wrote Nightwing, and he killed it with his final book on Nightwing. Hope he gets to write him again someday, but Nightwing The New Order, if you have not checked it out, you definitely should. It's worth a read. Next up is Green Lantern Rebirth, the book that brought the greatest Green Lantern back, Hal Jordan. This is from Jeff Johns and Ethan Van Sciver. I love this comic. It holds a special place in my heart because this was a comic that I wasn't really into Green Lantern, and then one Christmas my aunt got me this because she knew I was into comics, had no clue what I liked to read, and just like picked this up at Barnes & Noble and got it for me. I read it and I was like, this is awesome. Hal Jordan is sick. He punches Batman in the face in this. He takes on Parallax. It's so cool. You got a great Oliver Queen moment in here. It's just a really good comic. This is what brought Hal Jordan back. After everything that happened with Parallax, he's back now. He's back to being Hal. It kicks ass. If you haven't read Hal Jordan, if you haven't read Green Lantern Rebirth and you're a DC fan, I don't know what you're doing. You definitely should. This is definitely one of those must-reads in my opinion. I love this and Flash Rebirth. I was seeing which one to put on the list, and I was like, I gotta put Green Lantern Rebirth. Both are great, but Green Lantern Rebirth was the one for me to put on this list. Next up, we got Green Arrow Year One, one of the best origin books that is not brought up enough, in my opinion. This is from Andy Diggle and Jock. It's a really fun comic. You get to see Oliver Queen go from being, this bratty, spoiled rich kid to him going through the trials and tribulations on the island and become Green Arrow, and it's really cool. And I definitely think that you should read the origin of one of DC's most iconic characters, and to me, Year One is definitely his definitive origin. It's handled so well. It's got that great Jock art. It's so cool seeing an early on Oliver Queen figure things out on the island, especially if you're someone that maybe you watched Arrow and you never really read any Green Arrow comics and you wanted to get into them, or you want to see more like how well the island could be handled, considering how much it was botched later on in Arrow. Read this comic. It's really cool. And I just love me some Green Arrow, and especially this book. This is one of those origins that, again, I don't think is brought up enough in terms of a great origin comic book. You always hear about, you'll hear about Superman's Secret Origin or Batman Year One, but you don't hear Green Arrow Year One brought up enough. And I think it should be brought up more. It's one of the best. Next up is a comic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is Superman Batman Public Enemies. I personally think this is the best Superman Batman story ever told. It's going to be hard to ever surpass it. I love it so much. It's Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness at the top of their game. This is, to me, peak Ed McGuinness. I think this is my favorite art of him. I think he really perfected his art form in this book. Everything he draws looks so fantastic in it. I know in some other comics maybe things are a little bit too big and bulky, but in this I think he really nailed his style, and Jeff Loeb is Jeff Loeb. He kills it in this, and this is such a fun comic. If you've only seen the movie, you need to read the comic. The comic's so much better, and it's just a great buddy book of Superman and Batman being best friends. There's not enough of them two being best friends anymore. And I love seeing that dynamic in this. And it's really cool seeing how they each think of each other, the mirrored sides of each of them. It's really cool seeing how they're both two sides of the same coin, kind of. I love that in this. When they're both, when you're reading their thoughts, you see that Superman's thinking of a very similar thought as Batman is, but they both have different interpretations of whatever it is they're thinking about. And it's really cool. It's handled so well. You get a litany of villains in this. In this, you have Lex Luthor, who is the president at this time, and he's got a bounty out on Superman, and his best bud, Batman, ain't gonna let him fight that alone. There's also some drama with maybe figuring out who killed Batman's parents. Maybe it's not Joe Chill, maybe it's someone else, and a lot of drama there, and it's got an awesome ending. Just a great comic. It is so much fun. I love Superman Batman Public Enemies. This is one of those comics that I'll go back and reread pretty regularly. Like on about a year or two basis, I will go back and reread this because it's so good. It's such a quick read because it's so good. You just go through it so fast. And I love Superman Batman Public Enemies so much. Next up, we've got the Legion of Superheroes and the Great Darkness Saga. This is, to me, the premier Dark Side story arc. It's by Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen. They are masters in this book. You have a really cool storyline involving the Legion of Superheroes. And if you haven't read about Legion of Superheroes, they're a really cool underrated DC team. I personally grew up with them because I had a TV show, Superman Legion of Superheroes, going on at the time. And I watched that and I was like, wow, I've never heard of Legion of Superheroes before. They're so cool. And this is one of their best comic book story arcs. It's really cool. You have these servants of the Master that go around and grab these artifacts for the Master, and then he takes them and absorbs them. It turns out the Master's dark side, and he's got a lot of plans for things, and it's very interesting. I don't want to spoil it, but it's really cool. And this is, to me, the premier Dark Side book. Dark Side kicks ass in this. He does not mess around. It's really cool, and it's one of those ones that people read a lot of comics know how good it is, but it's not something that a lot of more casual people have read. So it's something that I think every DC fan should read, though, as, again, to me, it is the premier Dark Side comic. As far as Darkseid is such a huge villain in DC, and everyone knows about him, and there's all these different story arcs involving him, but the Great Darkness Saga is definitely the one, to me, that if you want to read one Darkseid story arc, this is the one you should read. Next up, we have the one and only Superman book on the list, because Superman Batman Public Enemies is a team-up book, so it's skirted around that. This is Superman Ending Battle. I will sing the praises of this book any chance I can get. It is so underrated, just like a lot of comics on this list, if you're noticing a theme here. I've had this forever. As you can see, the kind of doesn't really hold together anymore. I've had this for a long ass time, and I love it. It's by various writers and artists. You've got Jeff Johns, Joe Casey, Joe Kelly, Mark Schultz on here, because this was one of those books that went through several different Superman titles. It wasn't just like, oh, this is just collects all of Action Comics. It collects like Adventures of Superman, Superman Action Comics, whatever. It collects several, so that's why there's different writers and artists on it. It's really cool. You have Superman is being sent through a gauntlet of villains. He doesn't really know why, and he doesn't really know what's going on, and some other things are going on behind the scenes while he's dealing with all these random villains that are just showing up in Metropolis and causing problems. You also get a really cool moment involving Papa Kent, John Kent, Pa Kent, with a double-barrel shotgun taking on a Superman villain. It's great. It's awesome. This book is, if you're a Superman fan, you will love it. Even if you're not a Superman fan, I think you should enjoy it. But if you're a Superman fan especially, you should love this book. This is something that I feel like should be brought up more with books like All-Star Superman. I know some people be like, that's blasphemy. All-Star Superman's the only Superman comic ever written. No, there are others, and Superman Ending Battle is one of them, and it is great. I love it so much. Next up, I had to put a Jonah Hex book on here, and that is Jonah Hex Bury Me in Hell. This is not a comic that is that's just one continuous storyline. This is something where with Jonah Hex a lot, all the time, whenever Jonah Hex had a book other than New 52, it was never really like, here's a 6-issue arc, here's a 4-issue arc, here's a 6-issue arc, here's an 8-issue arc, whatever. It was mostly like, here's just one issue at a time, just completely separate stories. They're not really connected at all. It's the same guy and everything, but it's not like here's part 1, part 2, part 3. It was all just a new story every time, and then occasionally you'd have like a 4, 5, 6-issue arc. This collects a bunch of different of those singular stories. It's from Justin Gray and Jimmy Palmiotti, along with various artists, and has a lot of cool stories in here. One of my personal favorites is Jonah reconciling with his dad, or sort of confronting his dad, I should say, because if you know Jonah Hex, you know that his origin is his mom left him and his abusive dad because he abused them so much his mom couldn't take it anymore. She went off with this rich guy and left. Jonah was stuck with his abusive dad. His dad took him on a trip one day, needed passage through an area, sold Jonah as a slave to the Apaches because he needed to go through the Apaches' land. They took him, they abused him, beat him. He was a slave for the Apaches, and so he wasn't really a big fan of his dad selling him into slavery. So years later, when he's an adult and accomplished bounty hunter, he comes upon his dad, and his dad's not in a great state, and they have a very interesting confrontation, and it is just some of the best writing you'll ever read in comics. It's such an interesting story, and it's one single issue. There's a lot of other great stories in here, but that is just one of them, and it's so good. It's so interesting. Jonah, this guy that has experienced so much because of his dad, and then finally gets to confront him decades later. Jonah Hex Bury Me in Hell is one of my favorite from any Jonah Hex book, but especially from the Justin Gray, Jimmy Palmiotti run. This is one of my favorite of the collection. You should definitely read it. Jonah Hex is so underappreciated. I wish we'd get more Jonah Hex comics nowadays. There's not a whole lot of characters that you can use in mainstream comics to tell stories that you could like Jonah Hex. Next up, we got the one and only Batman story on the book, because again, Superman, Batman, Public Enemies didn't count, and that's Batman The Long Halloween. This has inspired basically every on-screen Batman you've ever seen, and there's a reason for it. It's an awesome comic. You have Batman going after a holiday killer, a killer that's killing someone on random holidays, and Batman doesn't know what's going to happen. He just knows that when a new holiday's coming up, he's like, oh crap, someone's going to die. I got to figure it out. He teams up with a then Lieutenant Gordon and the DA Harvey Dent, and you get to see Harvey Dent's origin, and it's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale that just... They do so good on this. I am someone that when it comes to Tim Sale, rest in peace, legend. I love the way he draws the Batman characters. I was not the biggest fan of his art in Superman for All Seasons, because I just, for me personally, I don't think his style fits Superman super well for me. But for Batman, I think his style fits perfectly for those characters in that world in Gotham. I think he draws them better than most. He's one of the best, and it's so good in Long Halloween. It's such a cool story, and there's a reason, again, that this has inspired so many different interpretations of Batman, because it's one of the best, and it's easy to get a hold of because it's one of the most popular Batman stories, and it's just amazing. And next up, we got Wonder Woman Gods and Mortals. This I have in the Absolute Edition, which also comes with some other stories. Absolute is the gigantic edition. As you can see, it's huge compared to, say, Long Halloween. You can see it's a bit bigger. I always suggest getting the Absolute Editions if you can, because the art is gorgeous in it, and to me it's the premier way to read comics. I love it so much, and there's always extra goodies in there for like interviews with editors and writers and artists, and it's really cool. But anyways, you can just get the normal volume 1 for Gods and Mortals. This is from George Perez and Lin Wein. It's so cool. George Perez did the art and the plot, and then Lin Wein did the dialogue for the most part. So this is really cool. I love this storyline. This is one of my favorites for Wonder Woman. It's really cool seeing the origin of Wonder Woman, how George Perez handled it, because this is the beginning of the Amazons. You get to see how the Greek gods and everyone come up with the Amazons, what their purpose is. The purpose is sort of to lead mankind more towards a peaceful way instead of a war way. And Ares is like, hey, but my whole thing is war and violence and destruction, so he does not like the Amazons. You get to see the Greek gods do a lot of horrific things to the Amazons, and you get to see why they go to Themyscira and are hidden away, and you get to see how Diana comes about, and she's very green in this. She's very new and naive, and it's really cool how the final confrontation she has with Ares, because she is a very new Wonder Woman. She doesn't really know how to do a whole lot. She's not experienced, and she's going against the God of War. So you're like, how's she going to beat the God of War? And how she handles it is really cool. It's so well done. The way I don't know how George Perez came up with that ending, but I love it so much. And it's just a great comic. Of course, George Perez draws it, so you know it's gorgeous. And yeah, Gods and Mortals, it's very, very good. It's the first volume of his legendary run on Wonder Woman, and I highly recommend you read it. And the final book on here is Infinite Crisis, which I also have in the Absolute Edition. As you can see, it's huge and awesome. Infinite Crisis is maybe the best DC Universe event, as far as like a universe-wide event. It's up there with Blackest Night and Doomsday Clock, which I love. I know a lot of people don't. But Infinite Crisis is amazing. You get to see it's got connections to Crisis on Infinite Earths and what happened with the Superman and Lois and Alexander Luthor and everything, and them trying to come back, and the Superman of Earth 2, pre-Crisis Earth 2, trying to save his Lois, and Superboy Prime goes insane and does some crazy stuff, and that ending is so good. That ending with pre-Crisis Earth 2 Superman, Prime, so like our Superman, and Superboy Prime is so awesome. I love it. Infinite Crisis is sick. There's a lot of cool moments here. I will never forget Black Adam shoving his fingers through Psycho Pirate's face, and it's just so satisfying after how Black Adam was treated throughout the comic by Psycho Pirate, and then that ending, ooh, so awesome. Infinite Crisis is, of course, worth a read. It's one of the best events for a reason. It's a classic, and if you can, get it in the Absolute Edition, because it's got some really good art. This is from Jeff Johns and Phil Jimenez, and I believe Ivan Reis and some others, and George Perez and Jerry Ordway, that's who I was missing, are also on this. It's a great comic, and it's revered for a reason. So yeah, those are my 10 must-read graphic novels, DC graphic novels. I might make one for Marvel. If you want me to, let me know in the comments below. And also let me know in the comments below, what are your 10 must-read DC graphic novels? I want to hear from you guys in the comments. Thank you all for watching. Now we'll see y'all later.
Hey, skinny boy, saucy boy, I be running to the bank. Yeah, you know I hit the gas in the whip full tank. Riding past the ocean while I'm listening to Frank.